How you ended up here at LA Eco Village.
Yeah, so I grew up in Koreatown, just like a mile from here, and I did not know that this place existed. Just went to college like an hour away from here, studied public policy, and got really interested in urban planning because I learned about the segregation of Los Angeles. And I should say, I went to boarding school for high school. So I was really into the super urban, like green areas of like Connecticut. And I wanted to sort of create like a more beautiful living environment through urban planning. So that was sort of like my driving motivation throughout college. And last summer, I went to the state of Washington on an island, Lopez Island Community Land Trust, and I was a construction intern for them. It's my first time doing anything with my hands for like a summer. I just like found out about the CLT model and was fascinated, and also like, why aren't we doing this in cities, because it was a rural island. When I came back to LA, I had to start thinking about my senior thesis. So I Googled like community land trusts in Los Angeles, and I found the Los Angeles Eco Village. And I think it's very like easy to find once you look for it. And even the people that I've been interviewing, they said, "Oh yeah, I was looking for something related to permaculture or like affordable housing or this or that." And like there are many avenues to come here, but like it has to be sort of intentional. Like you have to know what you're looking for. So even though I grew up here, I didn't know about it until I developed an interest like all the way up in the Pacific Northwest. So that's how I sort of found it. And once I came to a tour, I started going to the weekly dinners during my winter break, because I wanted to form relationships in order to like develop relationships before I like extract information from this community. So I feel like sort of like a quasi part of the community now, since I like got elected onto the board, and I'm interning for Lois right now. And there are many ways that I'm involved, but my primary project has been, I have a senior thesis, please talk to me. And I feel like I have learned so much more about the Eco Village in like a much shorter period of time. Even though I'm not going through the membership process, because I'm like asking all of these different people different questions.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when you first found out about the place and came on a tour, when you like had your first tour, what was it about the place that made you feel like, oh yeah, this is something I want to get more into?
I mean, like, I think I had a sort of year-long like environmentalist awakening the year before. Like my junior year of college, I took an anthropology of environmental justice class, which like sort of showed me that environmentalism didn't have to be blonde and white. Like I like started going to, I don't know if you're familiar with EcoCiv, but they're under the Claremont School of Theology, and they're sort of trying to bring together different partners across the world in conferences, on like creating a transition towards an ecological civilization is their like wrap. So I was interning for them, and I was sort of realizing that I wanted to practice what I was learning. And I think the biggest thing for me on Lopez Island had been that practice element. It was like everything that I've been studying, or everything I hear about in like progressive environmentalist like spaces, like people are practicing. They're so aware of like how much plastic they're using. They're so aware of like where they're curious about like where food comes from. They work in their gardens. Like it was my first time living in like a rural setting on that island. So when I came to the Eco Village, I was like, what? This is happening like in the middle of the city. Like these people are espousing the same values that I was so admiring on Lopez Island in the neighborhood that I grew up in. So I mean, I thought like I've like fate has brought me here. Like it's been sort of like a cyclical journey of sort of running away from a problem, like from the social isolation that we talked about earlier. Like I grew up in LA but only knew Koreatown. Like I was in the ethnic enclave, ran away to boarding school and thought like, okay, I need to go like stay in better places. and then coming back and realizing there are strategies for regenerating or like sort of making the places that I think are like not as fun to live in like a better quality of life. So yeah, so I think the biggest draw for me about the LA Eco Village is that it was so close to home, yet espousing the exact same values that I've developed throughout college. So yeah.
And you're on the board for the Community Land Trust.
Mm-hmm.
What is it meant for you to be kind of, I mean, relatively quickly kind of gotten involved in a sort of leadership capacity,
Mm-hmm.
and so what has that meant for you, and what have you learned?
Yeah, so there was the opportunity. The opportunity was presented to me. I don't think I would have been like, oh, I'm qualified to be on the board of a community land trust, having learned about this just like last summer, and not having had any experience. But Laura was essentially like telling me, oh, you have experience with the community land trust. We need more board members. And I think it was both like, oh, the community land trust was sort of in a place of like, we have this loan that's about to be due and we don't have enough board members, and our current board members are like, according to our bylaws, like they're expiring. So I think they just needed more people, and I feel like that's sort of the name of the game here. Like everything always needs more people, so if you're interested then they'll like bring you on. I do have like far like less like financial knowledge or even experience with like this kind of space, like this kind of grassroots space, because I've only been like a public policy sort of oriented track. I've not had many experiences in the grassroots organizing, so yes, I have a lot to learn. However, I found that like the little skills that I pick up, like just from leading a student club on campus or from the different readings that I've been doing about urban policies in LA, like I don't feel like too far behind. It's almost like, yeah, like sort of being part of a community that's like learning how to do this together, and there are differentials in knowledge, there are differentials in like experience. But like I have experience in running group meetings and sort of like paying attention to group dynamics. Like, so like for example, last meeting there was sort of like a conflictual like tension like moment, and then I sort of drew back on my experiences like leading meetings in clubs, and say like, okay, it's always better when people are looking at stuff on the board. So I started writing things on the board, and that led to like a sort of like realization on the part of like someone who has more experience than I, saying like, oh, there is a solution, thank you for putting that on the board. So that's like more like organizational or I guess things that anyone can learn. It's not like I have like 30 years of experience in the finance world, but I like offer what I can. I can't really articulate what I do, but it's also like my positionality as like a younger like student who's like curious and like eager to learn. I think that like softens the hearts of a lot of people, like whereas like among the adults there could be like personality conflicts, but I feel like I have a pretty neutral personality, or positive personality, especially when I'm engaging with older people. Like so I guess I have like less skin in the game of like interpersonal conflicts, because I'm just like, oh, I'm just learning from everybody. So I think that like brings like a neutralizing factor. So that's what I contribute to the board, and the experience has been like, yeah, like I can. So this is what like being on a board of a nonprofit organization is like. It's not that much different from being on the board, like the leading board of like a student club at school. So it's been very interesting this whole time.
I mean, I would definitely say that my experience with different communities is that, you know, there's a value of intergenerationality, there's a value around kind of lifelong learning, and a sort of openness to like, yeah, we're all figuring this out together. And so do you feel like that's what you've experienced?
Yeah, that's definitely what I've experienced. And I think there has been sort of a tension of like, okay, but there are people who have more expertise in this, and if we mess this up, we might lose this land. So that has been sort of a tension between like, okay, we want to bring everyone on board, and we don't want to like ignore anybody's opinions, but there's also like the objective is to keep the land in the land trust. So it's still playing out, and I think like I just feel like people are generally reasonable, and we know when to say like, what about this question mark, or like, I really feel like we should keep pursuing this like line of reasoning, and when to like sort of step back and like, okay, I think you have more experience on this than I do, so let's just go with your opinion on this. So I think it's more of like a fluid dynamic.
Say a little bit more about. I mean, I think what you're pointing to is sort of in cooperative groups. There's still a role for appropriate leadership.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts about appropriate leadership in cooperative groups?
I think communication is the key to all of that. Like, and transparency is another word that comes to mind. Like, I think in most cases when people feel like their opinions are not being heard, and I'm drawing from my like life experiences as well, is when they don't know how the decision was made or what the logic was, what the rationale was. And I find that like among adults, I have observed that some people tend more to like give like blanket statements. Oh, that's not going to work, without sort of backtracking and like, here are the reasons why it's not going to work. And I think when there is a value of cooperative like decision making or consensus decision making that's like on the table, like it's sort of like something that everyone bought into and it's in the back of everyone's minds, like there is like people are more likely to sort of like explain their reasoning or like not say like this is what is going to happen. Like I've studied the sort of like difficult years of the LA Eco Village, like through like talking to Lois or talking to different people, listening to the UCLA like oral histories on Lois, like, and I think like a big thing was, oh, like we don't know how the decision was made, so I guess this isn't really about consensus decision making. And if you talk to like the founder, like it's like, oh no, like they weren't ready to like make that decision. But like communication of that thinking process is key in collective decision making is what I'm taking away.
Cool. So I assume you still have family nearby and connections in with your Korean community. So what do they think of your involvement with this? Is there any more sort of interplay or interaction at this point? Or
so not yet. Lois wants me, and I want to like translate the tour into Korean. So, Korean American community, churches are nodes, like very strong social, economic, cultural, all of the above, like nodes. And I think that tapping into like Sunday school groups would be really good. I think like the lack of engagement with the Korean American community, one, like this is the part of Koreatown that is more Latino than Korean, but two, there has been a Korean person who's really interested in that. So I'm gonna work on translating the tour. There's a group from South Korea who's visiting in May, so Lois wants me to, and I want to like be the lead on like explaining what this is, but I also want to like start with my mom and her friends. The way that my mom like understands my involvement with the eco village is like, oh, those environmentalists, like it's sort of like the hand waving classic thing. It's interesting because my drive comes from sort of like where I grew up and like my mom, and like she's de facto a single parent, and like she says things like, oh, I wish I could just buy a big house, a mansion with like 5 of my closest friends, and that'll be my security for retirement, because she doesn't have a 401k, and she's experiencing the same like insecurities that I see reflected in like broader trends. And she espouses desire for the same kind of solutions that I'm studying. She just doesn't call it an eco-village or an intentional community. She just says like, that would be nice. And I'm just like, yes, that would be nice. And that's sort of what I'm trying to work on. And when I talked, like I also like run with Korean American seniors. Sort of like got roped into like a Korean American running club. I'm like decades their junior, but because I've had these intergenerational experience, like intergenerational friends, they say their minds are very much on retirement and how to die well and how to like prepare for that stage of their lives. And like my closest friend, I guess, he said something like, I never want to live in a senior living facility because like everyone's just there to wait and die, wait for death. And he said, I want to be around like young people, and I think like you should live in an eco village. So I like still need to work on like translating all of these concepts and like ways that are culturally like appropriate, because when I first described the eco village to them, it was like, oh, that's communism. And like South Korea has a very particular history with communism or socialism, like that kind of arrangement. So being from that community, but also like very much immersed in this community, or like this kind of like progressive, like maybe more white, like what rhetoric, like I think the work of communicating that is something that I consider my personal project, and definitely not something that has actualized yet. Like I'm talking to the Korean American Coalition because I interned there, and affordable housing is definitely like salient on their minds. So I think there's a lot of potential that is not quite tapped into yet, but that's something that I want to work on.
Cool. So you're studying public policy,
yeah,
and you also study urban development.
Well, on my own time, because there's no urban development like major or anything, but I like took environmental analysis classes, urban history classes, politics, econ classes. So I would go to a liberal arts school, so it's been like public policy has been like the most flexible major that let me do that.
Well, so in you're studying about public policy and urban development and all this different stuff, and then getting involved with the LA Eco Village. So where do they come together? Like what's the sort of overlap or the interface?
Well, I think especially in LA, like a lot of the objectives seem so similar, in terms of, like maybe philosophically, like the DIY urbanism that intentional communities espouse is not quite the same as like the politics of inclusion that like state bureaucrats tend to like go by. Like maybe there's like tension in that, but ultimately in terms of like raising the quality of life, like creating, like I've talked to like LA city planners like who talk about, we want to make this a more sustainable way of preserving affordable housing. We want to make alternative transportation like modes like equally as dignified as riding a car. Like what I hear from that is like everyone sort of like knows what is like a good society, what is like a good structure that facilitates good living. Like maybe there's like differences in opinion about like, okay, we need, like these experts need to like give that to you versus like we need to figure that out for ourselves. But for me, like the interface is like in the outcomes like of like happier lives, like better lives for people. And I guess specifically I want to be like a liaison between those two worlds, because I think that creating institutions is good, but if the institution like lasts for too long, then it becomes sort of set in their ways. I think that's how I think that's how most people understand the development model of Los Angeles right now. Like it's like lots of overlayering like laws that make it only possible for big like ultra capital like transnational development corporations to really like gobble up all the land and sort of like who knows where the financial capital comes from. And like smaller developers and also small communities aren't able to break into that system. But I think like communicating like, okay, there's this like whole set of actors that can sort of ease the burden of government in providing affordable housing. Like I feel like there is a project where these two like parties can come together. So that's how I understand it right now.
Mm-hmm. So what does success for the LA Eco Village look like? Like if what do you hope for it to grow or expand
One of the
into?
questions I forgot to ask you is like, what do you mean by successful intentional communities? So I think, okay, so far the Eco Village, I think, has been successful in demonstrating the fact that this community land trust model works. Like rent is only like 600 something in an area where rent is typically double that. So that's one success. Like another success is sort of developing the processes like of decision making. Like if you go to us two meetings, they're so much more structured, and like people are trained in facilitation, and people are like there are processes that people follow. And I think like I'm assuming that that's something that each community has to come to terms with or like figure out like with that group of people, and figure out how to bring membership process. So like the formalization, the like pseudo like formalization and institutionalization, for the sake of transparency and for the sake of democracy, like has been established. Like even if Lois passes away tomorrow, this is going to continue on. So I think that has been a success in and of itself. And also being like in college, like in my college experience, there's like different student activist groups always demand a space like on campus, like a physical space on campus, so that like people who are first gen low income can come to that space, who are like Native American born like can come to that space and sort of have like a central location where like resources are shared, communities are formed, friendships are formed, like different information is disseminated. And I think the LA Eco Village has been sort of like almost an incubator of that, because like so many like progressive or entrepreneurial like ecologically minded people live here. Like there is a natural sort of sharing of that. The LA Bicycle Coalition has like arose from like this place because like just like people who are interested in bicycles like sort of self-selected their way here, and that's all sort of like natural, organic. Like I think of the LA Eco Village as a success, but in future years, I think two like metrics of success for me personally, looking at the Eco Village, one would be education towards like the groups that are living here right now. Even on this neighborhood, I think there is a sentiment. I've talked to one neighbor, and he said like, oh yeah, we've been invited to those potlucks, like we don't really want to go. And he's Latino, and he like describes this project as like, oh, those white people over there. And I don't know like if there are any Korean Americans who know this place beyond like the people who are interested in development and are like, oh my god, this is an amazing model. So like I want to be part of like making the Eco Village more known, like as like to like groups that are trying to wrap their heads around how to provide affordable housing, how to like respond to climate change, how to like live more cheaply but also a better quality of life. Like in terms of like there's just not enough outreach. So that's like the one metric of like education. And the other one is I think that like there hasn't been as much of like the LA city seeing the Eco Village and saying like, oh, that's great, we need to encourage this, we need to build this into our policies. I think the one salient like example of that happening is the Greywater Ordinance that the LA city like sort of like experimented with individuals who are like experimenting with Greywater like before it was legal. I think right now there really needs to be a way that the city of LA creates a community land trust or creates like templates for different communities to be able to like bypass some of the onerous like zoning laws or whatever, like to encourage a proliferation of housing cooperatives that share resources, or encourage like the proliferation of community developers or like community just like groups of people who want to live in one place together. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of steps that have already been taken that make LA specifically a good place for this to happen. Like, for example, like the household unit, it doesn't have to be blood related. Like in a lot of other cities, it has to be blood related, but in LA it doesn't. So like I think things like that show that there is a lot of potential for like even further collaboration, and it doesn't have to be like the city of LA sponsors the LA Eco Village and starts like controlling what happens here. But I think like connecting with like really like creatively minded like government officials would be good in making some of the things that happen here possible in other contexts, because it's honestly the outreach like sort of approach that I've observed here has been like, if you want to know about us, you'll come to us, sort of like how I came to the Eco Village. There's not as much like outreach, and I think that part of that is like has been capacity, and like they've been trying to figure out their own processes before they can educate others. But the BVCLT, I think people on the board have expressed like, oh, eventually long-term goal, we do want to be able to help other like organizations like own their, or other groups of people like own their own like land in the community land trust, and like cooperatively incorporate a cooperative. So I think like the intent is there, but yeah, I don't know, it sort of takes like drive to make things happen. So yeah.
And you were expressing, you know, interest in like, you know, you've sort of like just stepped into this whole world of eco villages and intentional communities, and like you were asking me like, how do I do more? I mean, what do you hope to do? Like getting more involved with this. Where do you see yourself kind of going in all of this?
I would like to be a developer at some point in my life. It's interesting because I think there's definitely a spectrum, right? Like, and I asked you the question, like, is there a role for capitalist actors? I don't think I'm necessarily at the vision of like, okay, we are gonna replace capitalism like quite yet, like, because I don't know, like just like personality wise. But I think there is good work being done in so many different places, and the community level scale, like developer role, like seems the most like able, like flexible. Like market rate developers are constrained by the bottom line, like nonprofit developers are constrained by the tax credits. This government has their hands really tied by like NIMBY activists, and like high level policy, like they have more power in like forcing cities to do certain things, but then they also don't have the local jurisdiction control. So like I'm talking to a lot of different actors in different spaces, and what like impresses me about like Lois and also like the different members of the Eco Village is that like their interpersonal relationships with actors in all of these different areas like have proven useful for implementing their vision at this neighborhood, and that is cool to me. Like I would like to like sort of develop something. My first like project that I have in mind is a community land trust to help a Korean American priest who has an informal shelter, but his hands are sort of tied because he's been doing this like work out of the kindness of his heart, literally, like out of his own like pockets as well, because he doesn't want to affiliate with the church for fear of like retribution. Anyway, but I want to help him incorporate a community land trust so he can like purchase more property and hold it, and like start getting some subsidies from the government. And another idea I have is my apartment, the apartment that I grew up in and my mom still lives in, it doesn't even have recycling. Like there's no community. There is like a central pool area, and it is like mostly Korean. So I feel like there could be more community. So like in the short term, those are the two projects that I want to like work on. I don't know, like I like want to travel, like, and as I asked you, like, how did you like figure out how to travel to different intentional communities? So I want to eventually do that, but I think like having a home base is like really appealing to me, because I feel like throughout my college experience, it's been like, oh, how can this apply to Koreatown? How can this, like using Koreatown as a case study for my own understandings. And I think travel sort of expands my empathy a lot more, like because I lived in Connecticut, I am interested in what happens in Connecticut, or because I've like visited like Asheville, North Carolina. I know like exactly the community that you were talking about. So it's like, oh, like cool, like that's probably a good artist community, etc., etc. Like I want to be able to travel in order to expand my empathy, but also have like a home base. And I don't know if like I want my home base to be here forever, but eventually wherever I go, I want to develop something that's cool and like fits with my values, and also find people who are also interested in the same thing.
Cool. Thank you. Like,
Cool.
That was great. No, no other questions to me. Anything else you wanna share about your life here, or what you think is important about this, or anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
I don't know about about that, but something I did want to ask / like mention was like, are there a lot of like intentional communities that retrofit then? Not really.
There are some.
Okay.
I'm definitely familiar with some. N Street co-housing I think they're in Davis or Sacramento. I can't remember which. Another one that we actually featured in the Planet Community Series, Enright Eco Village in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
I also mentioned the other night the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative.
Yeah, the Boston one.
I mean, this group that I was in Jackson, Mississippi, the Cooperative Community of New West Jackson. So there are definitely some. Yeah.
Yeah, just because like I've talked to some architects and they said like, oh yeah, well, 99% of the housing stock in LA is not going to be new built housing. Like, so we need to figure out how to like create this like in like retrofitted areas, or like infill development areas. We can't like constantly like build new things. That's not sustainable either. So that was just, I don't have an engineering background, so I don't really know how the sustainability metrics like balance out, but that's like been interesting to me, like philosophically speaking, in terms of like, okay, looking at a blighted neighborhood and being like, we don't have to like demolish it, we just need to work on it, because this was like bought as like in slum conditions. So and people keep telling me that, it's like, wow, I can't believe it. But yeah, that was just like another question I had.
Yeah. Well, and then it's okay, I'm curious of your thoughts on retrofitting a community kind of along the lines of an intentional community. I mean, one, there's sort of a question of like, well, what does intentional community mean? Like, what exactly we're talking about out there, but in terms of trying to retrofit not just from the infrastructure level but the social level too. Like I think this question of how do you build an intentional community, sort of from the ground, not from the ground up, like build an intentional community from existing infrastructure and existing people. People in a neighborhood, in houses. How do you bring that together to form an intentional community, whatever that means?
Yeah, bringing intentionality to an unintentional community. I was just like re-listening to an interview I did, and one of the residents here was describing how sometimes like at the Eco Village it's so hard to plan even a meal because it's so intentional, and whereas like community is more warm and community is more like, okay, like obviously we're hanging out right now. So it's like interesting because like one line of my thesis that I'm playing around with is like, oh yeah, like intentionality isn't always comfortable, but it's always useful, like if you have like a certain goal, like, and maybe the goal is like power, like fixing power imbalances that often go like uninterrogated in like natural, like unintentional communities, or maybe the goal is like ecological living and like you want to be intentional about that, and having like an explicit set of values, sort of like, guys, remember, like, we're an eco village, so we should be more intentional about this. But also, like, I don't know, like, I think that sort of happens without like legal incorporation as well, like just like in terms of culture. Like, I mean, I wasn't born then, but like 20 years ago, like I guess I was born then. When I was like a baby, like I don't think environmentalism was as obvious of a thing as it is right now, because like among my friends at least, like the climate change is a real thing, and we do need to do things about it. And like using plastic water bottles, not so great. Like using a reusable bottle is better. Like this is like culture stuff, and I guess there could be a question of like whether that's intentional or not. But yeah, incorporating a little like streams of intentionality into like unintentional communities, I think, like you can't have it can't be a binary. Like it needs to be like work on every level. And I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but
no,
yeah.
I mean, I think it seems like what you're pointing to is the idea that if you can find sort of common cause amongst people who live in a place, and then be sort of conscious or intentional about addressing that problem together based on a set of values that are sort of made explicit. You know, so I mean, climate change is an obvious one. It sort of, you know, it begs for a shared value of sustainability that a neighborhood could share and decide, oh, we're going to start doing these things because we all recognize that climate change is real and we want to live more sustainably.
Yeah.
And that could just happen in any neighborhood.
And I think like safety is like a big value, and like children is a big value. Like children's well-being is a big value that I've seen like mobilize neighborhoods. Like, because the climate change is sort of like big and like far away, but if you say like, okay, we have like 5 kids who are dying every year because of traffic, like because of cars, then yeah, like we're going to make like these roads like more pedestrian friendly because safety. And I think, yeah, there are values that like can mobilize certain groups like better than others. I think, like especially like school moms, like I feel like that is a big